Topic here is the difference between Taylor and Ford, or the one best way to get your workers to produce in the 1920s. Really, this is about a simulation. Just to give you some background information, this is a reference to the Industrial Revolution. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, it's pretty much likely that you were probably making goods from start to finish without the use of machines, which is what the whole point of the Industrial Revolution is about. So the problem with machines is that you have to have some people man them, which is going to lead to some problems. So let's look at this particular assembly line. You see a bunch of people in a cramped space, and they all seem to be doing something with regard to the machines, which is the whole point of the Industrial Revolution, to stop making goods with hands and using machines like the two here to make goods. The problem is when you bring a bunch of people into the workforce, you are going to have to deal with the problems with that workforce. You know, is that guy working? This guy's late. Can they produce faster? And so on. They want to create a union. They just keep complaining. So that creates the biggest problem, which is the point of the one best way. How are we going to get our workers to produce? And Taylor and Ford come up with two different methods to try to answer that particular question with regard to the one best way. So in class, I created this simulation here where I have three groups, and let's say group one and group two could represent two different businesses, and they would have an owner and they would have a manager, and the goal here would be to get group to produce. So group one and group two are using whatever method available to try to produce, whereas group three, it's just one single person working on the item. And what are they doing? They're trying to color this particular image. So the image has to be colored using this particular method at the end. So keep in mind, if you are in this group right here, you were working as one individual, which was the point that I was trying to make before the Industrial Revolution, where you start to see people prior to the Industrial Revolution making the items from start to finish. So now we have group one and group two competing, and I don't know, group one and group two, maybe they have 10 workers, and then they have two people. One is a manager and somebody is the owner, trainer, and they have to figure out a way to outproduce the other one. So if group one is able to color 50 and they're able to color 20, then there's a difference of production. Whereas group three is just going to simply do whatever they have to do as an individual to color. So what you're going to find out is that group one and two, it's probably going to be very easy. You can have one student just constantly color this, next student can color this, and then maybe the eyes. Whereas in group three, you're probably going to get something very different. It probably would not even look like this. Keep in mind, the people in these two groups, they probably don't have to have any sort of skill. It would be simply me saying, all you're going to do is color the hair black. That's it. That's all you're going to do. So keep in mind that the person that is painting this all black, they have no consideration, no care. They don't know anything about the end product. And if I have this person in an isolated room, they probably would never even see the finished product like this, unlike the people who are in group three, who are starting from scratch and coming up with a completed item, and it probably will have some variation. So in this simulation, I would look at the groups, group one, two, and three, and then how many numbers they produced within, let's say, a minute. And then for that 1 minute, I'm going to pay them all $1. And then we would take that, how much did they color, and in that minute, let's say like 5 minutes. 5 minutes, let's say they have three. Then we would take within 5 minutes, we would take that, multiply it. They produce three. How many can they produce in an hour, and then how many can they produce in an 8-hour workday, and how many can they produce in a 5-day work week. So that's kind of the way this would work. You would have the groups kind of working to try to figure out how they're going to produce and just, outproduce the others. So in round one, that's kind of what they would do. And then I would pay the workers $1, and then we would, gather their production numbers. And I don't know what they would look like because it would depend on how well the worker, is taught to do their task, and how much the managers are on them to keep them on task. For example, you're going to want to call quality control, make sure that people are coloring in the lines. You want to make sure that people know exactly what they're doing. I might even throw in the obstacle of having you cut these out. I don't know. So after we do a couple of those rounds, we would look at the difference between Taylor and Ford. So for Taylor, his goal is to just remove skill from the equation, top-down management, which is kind of what we got going on here. Now, if your job, again, is to just color this, you really have no skill. I mean, your ability to make this, on a blank sheet of paper look like this, I don't know what your artistic level is, your coloring ability, but that is going to require some skill. However, if I just had you paint this section, again, that's what Taylor's trying to do. He's arguing if we remove skill from labor, then we will always end up with the same product. All we have to do is make sure that people know color just this area. You're coloring just this area. And think about how mind-numbing that particular task is going to be. Whereas Ford is thinking if I increase wages, that is going to get the people to produce. So then I would ask you, if your job was to color this head 1,000 times an hour, an 8-hour work week, that's 8,000 you have colored. Now we times 5 for the 5-hour work week. I mean, at what point are you just going to be exhausted, annoyed, and really struggling with this? So it doesn't maybe matter how much I paid you. Maybe it does. I don't know, because it's going to depend on who you are. But that's how Ford was thinking about answering the question. So when we go back to the item, what's the one best way to get your workers producing? Ford is saying give them more money. Taylor is saying remove skill. And when you remove skill, that could have some consequences. So that's kind of the way this simulation works. Um, to get people to produce. Ford is going to pay more money, and Taylor is just going to reduce skill. And so during the rounds, you would want to watch your workers. You want to minimize their movements, which means you really don't want somebody, like if we look here, let's go here. So giving you this sheet of paper is one movement. Coloring this is 2 movements, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. That's 11 movements. That 11 movements, if I ask you to color this, um, from blank to this finished product, how many times are you going to move your hand to pick up the crayon, the yellow one, to pick up the green one? That's Taylor's completely against that idea. His argument is no, we need to reduce movements to a bare minimum. I mean, even the idea of you grabbing the changing of the markers, no, just hire somebody to hand that person the yellow marker, hire somebody to give them the black marker. And when you do that, you have reduced skill production to such a bare minimum that your labor force becomes replaceable. And that's the end goal. You're going to try to increase your production. And think about the question here. If I pay you more money, is that really going to change your attitude? And that's pretty much the point of this particular simulation, to keep track of production and use the methods. Looking at the questions here, how did independence represent skilled labor? It goes back to the point I mentioned before. Your ability to create this finished product from start to finish. Think about it. If I gave you a blank sheet of paper and asked you to draw this and color it, how many you're going to be able to do that? However, if I provided the one that has the outlines, you probably can do that, and you would always end up with this finished product. As a business owner, does it make good business practice to have workers know every aspect of production? I would say no. Why? If we're talking about you just coloring this black section here and the eyes, that's just one phase of the production. If all phases of production, the yellow, the green, and all of that stuff, you probably can go into business on your own and be my competitor. So as a business owner, does it make good business practice to have workers know every aspect of production? I would say no, because they could become your competitor. I would also say no, because at that point, you might have to pay them more. I mean, think about that question. If I was paying you just to color this head every day, how much should I pay you? I mean, to me, that would be the minimum pay that I can get away with. However, if I'm paying you to do all colors, now that's going to be different. That's going to require a little additional skill. How could Taylor's method force wages down? Well, think about the point that I just made. I can easily train somebody to color this hair. That doesn't really require much. And as a result of that, the wages are going to go down. Which method seems better? And why? I don't know. Think about the increasing of money, if that's going to motivate people, or think about removing skill to a point where people are just really not doing much but tedious piecework, which brings up the image of modern times. In this particular scene here, you have the salesman. So this salesman right here is trying to sell this device, and this device automatically feeds the worker. What's interesting, if you were to watch this particular scene, all three come in and they play the sales pitch through the record player. The record player is telling the potential customer here everything that needs to happen. And so think about that. They've reduced skill to a basic minimum. Basic minimum. I don't know what your ability to sell is, but think about it. Look at an item in the room that you pen, scissors, doesn't matter. What would be your sales pitch? Are you a born salesperson? If you are struggling with the ability to sell and convince people to buy, a better way to reduce skill would simply be to have this record player and play this particular record, and you would always get the same outcome, the same sales pitch. So Charlie Chaplin in the film Modern Times is looking at the removal of skill, and he also does it later on in the film, but he uses silent movies. Charlie Chaplin was against talkies, and he felt that talkies was, talking in a film was going to somehow destroy the purity of acting. Um, and so in the film Modern Times, which was the first time anybody had heard Charlie Chaplin speak, um, he goes out and he sings this song, which is a mixture of so many different languages that you could barely make out what he's saying, and it's known as the gibberish song. So Charlie Chaplin is able to uh, say something. Like if we look at skill and say acting, silent acting requires skill, your ability to do that without saying anything. Charlie Chaplin is saying, well, I still don't need to say anything because you're not going to understand what I'm saying. In Chaplin's view, acting, silent acting, was a skill. To be able to communicate love, anger, sorrow through your emotions is something that he considered to be, a skill. So the answer, which method seems better and why? I mean, I don't know. I guess that's going to depend. If you want to have a weak labor force, one that's always replaceable, then I'd say go with Taylor. How did you feel working just getting by in the rat race? If you're making a $3 wage and your expenses are $3, how do you feel with that particular scenario? What money do you have left over? What role could unions play in 1920 factory work? That's why you see union activity really starting to increase. And as a worker paying rent, will you be able to afford the picture you are creating? How could this point alienate you from your labor? And what I'm getting at here is another point that Charlie Chaplin is making, where you have simply become a cog in the machine. I did a search for alienation of labor, and you come up with a Marxist theory, alienation of one's labor.